Howdy, thank you all for being here. My name's Eames Demetrios. I'm director of the Eames Office and also the chairman of the board of the Eames Foundation, which takes care of the Eames House. And I'm going to start. Are
you related to the Eames?
What?
Are you related?
So yes, you will. The question was, am I related to Charles and Ray? The first name is a giveaway. It's my mother's maiden name. Charles had a sister and a daughter, so the name was not going to go down as a last name, so they gave it to me as a first name. And I promise I would have revealed that, but it's good to get that out of the way. And let's see. So this is a way to visit. This is a walkthrough to the Eames House. How many of you have been to the Eames House? Okay, so you walked up this driveway, and I did this about almost 25 years ago, this video, and it's pretty similar even now. There's now a gate because of and if we have the music just a little bit lower, but I was really trying to capture the vibe of this little enclave that's there in Pacific Palisades. And now there's a gate because after COVID we had to have more control of the spot. But this is pretty much the way it was when they moved in 1949. And sort of the premise of this whole talk is that the Eames House occupies a singular place in the work of Charles and Ray Eames, in the sense that you can get to just about everything they did through the house. There's a connection to it, and that's different than all their other work, including some of the films that are so well known, and the furniture, of course. You can see that it was built in 1949, and it was built of off-the-shelf parts to sort of explore how one could make a modular house in a very efficient way. And yet it's a very human place. We visited there as grandkids, and over time gathered all these collections and meanings. And even today, when you go there, it pretty much looks this way. And sometimes people say, well, that's it's a little bit, is that morbid, sort of leaving it the way it was when Ray passed away. But actually, it was pretty much like this until starting in the late 1950s. And all these, Ray had this, she said once that the word totem stands for the objects that evoke meaning. And they had a lot of those in the house. You also see the tassel over the door. That's a screen, motion picture screen, so they could screen movies in there. And then you also see how the grid kind of informs, even for the patio, makes it feel like another part of the room, or another room of its own. And the reflections really make the house kind of this semi-permeable membrane. And then one of the most beautiful views in the world is from the master bedroom, looking down on the living room. So when we were kids, there were a lot more monarch butterflies. So a change comes everywhere, but even so, they do still come, and they're just a great delight. And they did once cover the trees, and it's another aspect of the house which people don't always get, is that it's a little bit of an oasis of nature, especially in a city. The other thing is that if you've been to Santa Monica but not to the house, it's about a couple miles north of the Santa Monica Pier, just to kind of orient on the way to Malibu. And the thing that's important about that is that this was out of town. The Eames House was out of town when it was built. Even the movie stars who had beach houses, they were just right like a few blocks north of the Santa Monica Pier, and that felt way out of town. Now, of course, Malibu it's just this, it's all one blur of city and development. So this was their house, and these were not pets. This was I still don't know exactly. They got the eagle there. It may have just arrived. And you also see another. I said that it was sort of a semi-permeable membrane with the glass. You can see on on the house itself, there's what looks like a shadow there. And that's actually a photograph of a shadow of the trees on the house. So they were really good at adding all these different layers to the, playful layers to the experience of everything. There's Ray and Charles, and the kitchen of the house. This is them working on a photo shoot in the studio. So when they moved in 49, they'd been a partnership since 41 when they got married, and they had a studio in Venice, but they didn't own the whole space. So a lot of the work, a lot of the films were made in the 50s, were made at the house. This is an amazing set for Toccata for Toy Trains that was in the studio of the house, and that's resting time. You can see the smile on both their faces in the living room of the house. And then they built the house, started building the house in 49. We'll get to kind of the origin of that in a moment. But for the reason I wanted to start with all this is that the house is many things, but it was always a home. And these are images when my older siblings stayed there in the 50s. Charles and Ray set it up with a huge number of boxes so they could get on a rope swing and swing off the stairs and knock down all the boxes. That's my brother Byron with sister Lucia, Ray and Lucia upstairs at the house. Lucia's been the director of the Eames Foundation for quite some time and so passionate about the house and taking great care of it. It's Carla reading the funny papers, which Charles and Ray felt was a very important part of life. They even, when they made a recap of the events of the 50s for CBS, they did a recap of all the events, or in the events of all the major comic strips of the era. So it was a kind of fun way to look at the decade. It's our mother, and my sister Lisa, and Mom in the house. This is me. But fortunately, we got one of me standing up. And actually, one of the fun things was one time we visited with them. We either visited en masse or we got a solo trip. And obviously, the solo trips were very desirable. And this is in the Neutra house that's next door to the Eames House. Some of you probably know that it's part of the case study program. And there were basically 4.5 case study programs in the case study houses on this driveway. And Dr. Bailey's house had a swimming pool, and Charles and Ray never made it, but they were exploring the idea of making a film about toy ships, the way they had made a film about toy trains. Humorous story about the swimming pool is that Dr. Bailey was somebody who knew nothing about architecture. In a way, he was like the ideal client, in a sense, for the case study program, but he found out there was good discounts on materials, and so he got assigned to work with Neutra, and Neutra designed the house. And Dr. Bailey became such a passionate, it was designed for a couple that just starting in life so that it could be expanded easily for kids as they were born. And then the swimming pool, can't quite see it in the picture, but it has a dog leg in it. And Neutra drove by when the kids finally persuaded Dr. Bailey to have a swimming pool, and he said, "Oh my God, well, we can still save it." So he visually put a dog leg in the pool, and the kids, for decades, rued the fact that if Neutra had driven by, just even a month later, they would have had a regular pool like everybody else. But Neutra's right; the dog leg really helps the look. And that's our older son with my wife Shelley, who's here. And after Ray died, the Eames office moved to the house, and we really started taking care of the house as a family. Now, the other question, aside from my name, is I'm sure a lot of people have asked about the fire. We're very lucky. The house is still standing, and it's a very, it was very, very traumatic, and I was trying to figure out how to talk about it in this context. We had such an amazing outpouring of love and concern and support, lots of emails, people, and there was even a time when we weren't sure that the house had made it. But I thought just showing, we've all seen images on TV and online that have captured it. So to give a sense of just how intense it was, and going back about 30 years, there was another fire that we could actually see from the Eames House, or the property of the Eames House in Malibu. And what you're about to see is 12 hours of that fire. gives you the sense of the speed at which so this is not the recent fire, this is 30 years ago. But I did a time lapse from this point overlooking PCH, and I think it went 12 miles or 12 or 15 miles in about 10 hours. And that's, it's just almost unfathomable. So this was the Malibu Old Topanga fire in 1993. Much less populated area, but that seems more relevant than more pictures of because we've been through some of our neighbors' houses. The main thing that was the factor, we have to say, is good luck. I mean, there's a lot of capriciousness to this. We were at our house is at the far end from where the fire came into Pacific Palisades, and there are about a few blocks near us that are also mostly untouched, but it's truly appalling. And this is, and then what's interesting is that, yes, we're incredibly fortunate. You can see where the fire retardant is on there, so there's some cleanup that's involved. But the thing that is also important that is inside, no house probably is as airtight as one thinks it is, and certainly not the Eames house. And so there's a lot of smoke damage inside that we're having to deal with. I'm showing this one. We did remove quite a few objects from the house before the fire came, so it's just a little bittersweet that we still haven't been able to put it all back because of the work that remains to be done. But we were very lucky, and if anyone here sent us a note or reached out, thank you very much. It really was nice to know that so many people were on our side. So this is the house, the design of the house, but that's not the first design of the house. And this is one of the reasons I think that the Eames House is so connected throughout all their work. So on the left, you see the original design for the house. And it was going to be a cantilevered structure that was actually designed by Charles Eames and Eero Saarinen. And then on the right is the Intenza house, which was built and is there. And he was the publisher of Arts and Architecture magazine, which sponsored the case study houses. And so this is a collage they did of after they decided to rearrange it. Basically, they realized that they were doing, actually our mom remembered doing a lot of picnics with Charles and Ray in the meadow of the Eames house before it was built. And they realized they were doing what architects very often do, which is to find a very beautiful site and then destroy it with the building. So they redesigned it to be built from pretty much the same pile of parts, and that's what you see here. You can also, you can see between the two buildings, there's this courtyard that has a grid in it. And it's one of the subtle things about the house is that, we think of it as one building, and it's technically true, not just because of philosophy, but because the retaining wall connects both structures. But it's also even more than that because both the courtyard and the patio have these grids in them that really make you feel like it's a continuity of the interior space. And when we would visit as kids, we would the first thing they would do would be unlock the front door, but then open the sliding doors on both buildings, so you really use that full access. The story of light is a big part of Charles and Ray's life and work, and this is and actually, interestingly, these resin panels were in the house in 1949, and that's one of the first uses of fiberglass by them. Obviously, went to the fiberglass chair, so it was definitely a time when they were experimenting with all sorts of materials. And the shadows. The other interesting thing about the house is that it's actually where the house is. The ocean is not west, it's south. So that means that because it curves there, so that in the morning the sun comes in with the silhouettes with the shadows of the eucalyptus trees there. It's quite great. This is the first Christmas. They moved in Christmas Eve, 1949, and since that's a really awkward day to celebrate a celebration, because most people are doing something, a lot of people are doing something else. We're very happy that South by Southwest let us celebrate here by this talk. And when I said the story of light, let's see if we can. is that this is another project they did in that time. This is a galaxy light that they designed in 1949. And so Charles, actually, one of his jobs when he was a kid was designing lamps, because his father was a Pinkerton detective, and he was shot in the line of duty on a railroad in a rail yard, and so he was very badly wounded, so he couldn't work. So Charles had to do odd jobs and things like that, and so. But he had in retrospect, his upbringing was a great opportunity to learn lots of different skills that he used in his work later. But this particular lamp was designed for a show at the Detroit Institute of the Arts, a kind of good design show at that time. And then the collections in the house, you see the white ceramic there, that was one that they collected in India when they were asked by Nehru to visit India for about 4 months and advise on how India could deal with sort of a lessening of quality of goods since independence, and how to deal with westernization in a certain way. And so they actually, so one of the students that was a tour guide for them at that time was a man who named Hakusha. And he came into the Eames House about 10 years ago, and he remembered that particular bowl and the exact village where it was. And he said, I've always wanted to make a book just out of all the pictures that Charles took of that village, because it was 4 months of going through all sorts of different parts of India. And then in the end, they recommended the creation of the National Institute of Design, they didn't design the structure. They designed the curriculum. And one of the things that there was something that that was very important to them, or one of the objects that struck them was this object called a lota, which is a vessel for carrying water. And what they liked about it is they wrote down all the different problems that it solved or addressed. Like, that its cost was, the cost of it was within, a person's, a poor person's capability. That the gender of the people who usually touched it, how you could hold it carry it on your head, the crook of your arm, on your elbow, all these different things. And it's a list of some 30 people. It's not 30 people, 30 attributes. And their point was that nobody ever made that list. It was designed by generations of use, and they thought that that if India would look inward to its own history with literally thousands of cultures on the subcontinent rather than outside, when it's not about, it would be a opportunity to create new lotas, a new approach rather than getting ready-made solutions. In fact, they even when India, when the government asked them if they should buy a computer from IBM, and IBM was a big client of Charles and Ray's, they said, no, you're actually better off making a cardboard computer that doesn't actually work, but you would learn what it's supposed to do and what are the things that are going into it. And that way all the learning happens in India, and that's where and so this institute is still going on. It's one of the most important schools of design in India, and Charles and Ray visited it regularly in their travels. This is the gentleman Hakusha, the artist who gave the tour. He did this little flautist that's still at the Eames House, where actually it's under conservation right now. But again, the house is a mirror of all sorts of aspects of the Eames's life and work. There's also you might call them characters, different objects that appear in different ways in the Eames's work. So, for example, this is a photograph from about 1955, and you can see that kind of wheel. They liked objects that had what they called way it should be-ness, that if the object was well designed, the idea of designing it wouldn't come up at all. And then today, that object has migrated to a different place. So when we say we're keeping it the way it was, we are, but during their lifetime, there was a lot of evolution that happened in the living room. This was the Fornacetti, covered by walnuts. That was today. This is in the 50s. So for Charles and Ray, it wasn't like it was a precious place, it was a thoughtfully curated place, but it was not obsessively curated. Things were evolving and changing in an organic way. So this is a little graphic I did of some of the that we did of some of the different disciplines that Charles and Ray explored and excelled in. They did books. They did clothing. Some of the at the Eames House, there's still some of their shirts and dresses. Ray just had these designed for herself these amazing pinafore dresses. And if you ever seen a Marx Brothers movie, you know how Harpo just can bring anything out of his pocket. Ray was a little like that. There was always a treat, always something. And we did an exhibit. My sister Carla did an exhibit about Ray, and one of the things she put up was a dress and to show the deep pockets that it was designed for. And one woman came up to me afterwards and said, "Now I know Ray was a genius. She figured out how to get rid of her purse." And so, and everything was in there, everything one needed. Furniture we'll talk about in a bit. They did over 125 short films. We'll see a little bit of that, and lots of toys, many exhibitions, and all these things you can find talismans of in the house, but not only talismans, but points of connection. So for example, they also had this sort of cast of characters that this is this bird that's in the house. And what they loved about this bird is that it was the idea of bird. They were really interested in toys versus scale models because a toy was almost a summary of what that object was about, whereas it was different than being an illusion or the perfect replica of the real thing. And some of you may have seen this picture. So this is probably the most famous appearance of the bird in their work. But again, it was a humble resident of the house, and when they were doing this shoot, they needed this accent, and they said, "Okay, we got just the right thing." So it was a very fluid connection between their life and work. One of my favorite things in the house is this is a model for this exhibition they did called Mathematica. How many have been to Mathematica, the exhibit? Okay, is anybody here? Oh, good, cool. All right. So it's so there are 3 Mathematicas on display today that the Eames has designed, and so this one of the pieces is this piece. If we could have the sound for this, yeah. So this is the probability machine, and one of the things that Charles and Ray were firm believers in education was direct experience. And the more you could give people an experience that they would build on, then the more valuable that educational experience was. So about, I don't know, like 16,000 marbles go through this every 20 minutes. And they drop down from a central point up above. And it all starts over and over again. And, as a kid, obviously, it's delightful to hear a bunch of noise in an official museum. This is the rest of the Mathematica exhibit. But all of the things that are in the Mathematica were to give people this direct experience, because the first reaction to that bell curve is that you see that it basically made a bell curve. Every time all those marbles go through, it makes about the same thing. So the first reaction is, well, how do they do this? What's the trick? Are there magnets? Is it programmed this way? And really what you realize is that it's just what happens. That is the probability machine, is that when you drop all those marbles in a certain place, from the same place, and then have these opportunities for certain decision trees, it makes the bell curve. And that's the kind of educational experience they wanted to give people they could take that experience with them. What's interesting to me is that exhibition, the one you see here, was designed in 1961. That same exhibition is still on display at the Boston Museum of Science, the Henry Ford Museum, and the New York Hall of Science. And how many exhibits can you think of, science exhibits in particular, that you could show that are 70 years old now, almost, I guess 60 years old, 65 years old, and that are on display intact? And you would think that because science and math deal with certain kinds of verities and truths that, would always be, reliable. But in fact, they get dated very quickly. And yet here is this exhibition that's at the Henry Ford as a really good math exhibition. They also treated it as a historical object as well. And they did a great restoration on it. So that again is like, so it's a little, that was really important how they thought about education, to give people experiences that they could take with them. There's also a lot of their friends visited the house. This is Annie and Joseph Albers, who were good friends of theirs. And there's a humorous story about this painting, which is in the Eames House. And what happened was that when our mother was in college, on the parents' weekend, Charles picked her up and brought her to New York City. And they went to Joseph Albers' studio, and Albers had been wanting to give Charles and Ray one of his paintings. If you're not familiar with his work, you've certainly seen the Homage to the Square series, where it's basically 4 different squares nested with each other, just many different iterations of that. And he did an amazing book called The Interaction of Color. So Charles said to our mother, Lucia, I picked out 5 paintings, and you choose the one we go home with. So Mom chose that one, and always had great taste and a great eye. And then they went to a Jackson Pollock show at the Betty Parsons Gallery. On Parents' Weekend, we took our kids out to pizza, so but it was good pizza. So then, a couple years later, Albers came to the Eames House, saw the painting, he said, "Oh, I know I can fix it." And before they knew it, he had grabbed it and taken it back to the hotel. And he took it back to New York and repainted it. So if you look closely at it, you can see it's kind of deteriorated and faded in certain areas. Can you see that up there? And so an Albers scholar came right after Ray died and saw it and said, "You monsters, how can you treat this painting so badly?" And Ray said, "Look, it came by its damage honestly." And Ray said after that, never give a painter a second chance. So, words to live by. There's also, this is a little detail, the Hollywood scene. This is Billy Wilder and his wife Audrey I think this is from their honeymoon, where Charles and Ray went with them for part of it, and they went on a camping trip. Well, one of the other objects that's in the Eames House, that was in the Eames House, was this book they made for Billy when they visited him on the set of Ace in the Hole. Has anyone seen that? It's a Kirk Douglas movie, Ace in the Hole. Good? All right. Great movie. It was actually Billy Wilder's favorite of his own movies. It's a totally fanciful plot about a journalist who milks a tragedy for his own benefit. Totally made up. So they went to Canyon de Chelly, where it was made this book for him. And again, it was just a book they made for that moment. It wasn't for publication. It was just as a gift. We talk about the color of the Eames House, and people often say it looks like a Mondrian, and it does. But it was not done for that reason. It was really Charles talked about how they're really trying to give people a flavor for the house just from looking at it from the outside. Because this was, if you look at a Cape Cod style house, you have a pretty good sense of what it'll be like to walk in there. But they thought that maybe they could give people a flavor of it, as he would say. And they were really good at understanding that aesthetics could be a part of function. So it's not, but I'm not going to talk about the outside of the house. I want to talk about this inside. Because even that multicolor thing happened with the trusses that are in the living room. And again, you can imagine it being an equally wonderful house, all white or all black or all anything. But by adding these layers of color, it really calls attention to certain aspects of the structure. And most of all, I think it adds variety to your experience of it. I mean, if the facade were all one color, it would be fine. But there's something about there's something welcoming and playful about that. And like I said, they used to talk about Henry Dreyfuss, who designed the classic telephone. He, as an example of understanding that aesthetics could be a part of function, because they said, the phone looks pretty good, the old phone. And then they said, and when it when you pick it up, you hang it up, it sounds okay. And when you smell it, it smells okay. And when you taste it, because we all have tasted our phones at some point, whether we want to or not, it's all right. You wouldn't have it for dinner, but it's all right. But and then you say, well, so what? Well, imagine they're all the opposite. It looks bad, it's screechy, it's stinky, it tastes awful. Would you say it was more functional or less functional? Hopefully you'd say it was less functional if it was bad in all those ways. And I think that, and so that's why I say Charles and Ray understood that aesthetics could be a part of function, is that they can be playful, but they also bring joy. As Charles said, who would say that pleasure is not useful? So anyway, this is one example, the trusses in the living room. And then here's another example, which is a movie they made at the Eames Office about exponents. And so they're, again, trying to give the student a direct experience, a visualization of what it means to use exponents. And then they try to show that, it's true for, that these are variables. And again, just by, the color isn't, quote, necessary, but it adds something to the experience. It's simple, it's playful, and by showing that things can change in that way as well, it kind of enriches the idea of variable. They once said that in the future there will be a need for small packets of knowledge, and I think that's so true. But again, this idea that you can play with form and color in something that you're really doing for for an educational piece, and it's part of people's experience. And it does communicate this aspect of that these are universal variables, that they can be anything, except you can't divide by 0. This is a tumbleweed they collected on their honeymoon coming to Los Angeles in 1941. It gets smaller and smaller all the time, but it's still there. And you'll notice the living room is empty. And the first time we actually changed anything in the house was when the floor of the living room was just cracking so much it was interfering with the visual experience. The LA County Museum wanted to borrow about 20 items from us so they could recreate the Eames House in the museum. And we said, well, why don't you just borrow everything? And we had 6 months to fix it. It was very surreal. There's the Eames House living room at the LA County Museum. But they did a really great job of it. And it was actually really cool. And the other thing that we really learned from that is how when Charles and Ray had built up all the things in the living room, there was a whole perimeter of objects that were very subtle, but they kind of were like a wall. They added up to a wall that kind of coaxed you into being in the central space. It was very interesting having be there. Then we thought, well, there was a famous tea ceremony that was done at the Eames House. So, but it required the living room being empty. So we recreated that tea ceremony. We found the woman who had been the original tea master. So that's my sister Lucia with her back to the camera talking to Mrs. Matsumoto. And we did this recreation of this. That's Charlie Chaplin in the center on the right, Isamu Noguchi and Shirley Yamaguchi. And basically Shirley Yamaguchi she was in a movie called I Was a Japanese War Bride, and she needed to, as part of the movie, had to do a tea ceremony. And so she was taught by Mrs. Matsumoto, and I'm sure Charles and Ray just said, well, why don't we do a tea ceremony up at the house? But what was interesting talking to Mrs. Matsumoto is that the tea school that she is part of was a hereditary tea school. And so the eldest son basically got the school. And with all due respect to architects, apparently the second son had to go be an architect. So he came, and Charles and Ray had put in this panel to kind of compress the height of the living room, about 17 feet, to compress the space a little bit. And so this architect came, and when he saw that, when he went back to Japan, he started incorporating that idea in the tea houses he would design in Japan. So it was very interesting, cross connection that happened there. And there you can see Chaplin, Noguchi's on the left. I think this picture is by Charles. Ray's in the back. You can also see how the little LTR tables that they did were perfect for the tea ceremony. The living room was often a showroom to play with things like that. It was also a place, as Charles said, they would sometimes do a design and then bring it up to try it out, and it would just stay there. So this is a gold leaf coffee table that there's just one that one of a kind in the Eames House, and then we did a limited edition for the 50th anniversary. If you're into the LTRs, this is also a really cool one where the shock mounts are used as the glides to touch the floor. And then this is a planter, and you have to look a little bit carefully, but you can see that there are wheels under the planter. So that's so you can keep your planting arrangement, wheel it out of the way, vacuum sweep, or whatever. So again, some of these ideas went into their work elsewhere. Some did not. Modeling was a big part of the office. So you can see in the bottom corner there, that's that bridge house I was talking about. And you can see that those dowels represent the trees. And so this is their original design, and then they redesigned it to be made from the same pile of parts, as I mentioned. But that modular idea was not one that they let go of. Let's see if we can get this. Maybe they didn't. They're still not letting go of it. There you go. Okay. I'm going to go back a little bit because I wanted to show you that. So you can see here that by not chopping down those trees, they preserved the meadow, and then they scooped out the hillside there, and that's where the two houses went. And then there's a concrete retaining wall that goes there. That same iterative process happened with all their designs. This is a chair called the DAT1. Some of you may have seen that poster of Ice Cube that was done at the same time as we emptied the living room. But what's interesting about this chair is you can see that it has these sort of cool fenders on it, and it's kind of just basically angle iron on the bottom. This is called the DAT1. Then about 4 years later, they were constantly trying to improve it, and they made this chair, which is it has a totally different base, and its name is the DAT1, because they thought of their furniture in terms of the problem that it solved, not its look. They're always trying to improve anything that made it better. The tilt mechanism is a little bit better on this one, but by using this base, it's a little the costs go down a little bit because that was a base they developed for some other chairs. So it's just an approach, and then the same is true with their iterative process with furniture, even on the macro scale. This is the organic chair. The organic chair was by Charles and Ray. It was supposed to be kind of like the side chair we know today, but the company that they worked with couldn't mold the plywood, and so this in fact the reason it was upholstered is because because it splintered so much. But then they went on and experimented with splints, which they did in World War II. There's that beautiful sculpture that they did the first time they molded plywood in a complex curve. But again, the modeling, and this time the model was done with cardboard. Each of those cardboard pieces is a model of the veneer for that sculpture. So veneer by veneer, they modeled this as they tried to figure out how to mold plywood into a compound curve. And then these are some of the experiments in World War II. Then they made this chair, which was metal, but it was cold to sit on, especially if you wore a skirt. So therefore, they put neoprene on it, but that made it clunkier. And then they made the chair you see today. The trash can chair is on proud display at the Henry Ford Museum. And the story behind that is that after they had made the form in paper mache, they brought it to this guy who did auto body prototypes and boat hulls. And they said, "Can you make this?" And the guy said, "Sure. It's whatever. And for $20 extra, I'll make you a second one." And they said, "Okay." And they really wanted to see if that material that you saw on the screens could work for furniture. So Charles came back a week later, and he said, proof of concept is going to be great, because this guy was a custom manufacturer, and nobody had made it on any scale. And so then Charles reached for the second shell, that shell. And the guy said, well, where's my $20? And the chairs hadn't really taken off yet, so they didn't have $20. He put it on this trash can, and it was his office chair for the next 35 years. And when we were doing an exhibition in the late 90s, Craig Hodges and Ming Fung, who were the designers of it, went to see this guy, and he said, is that what we think it is? Within 8 hours, it was in the permanent collection of the Henry Ford Museum. So again, these things in retrospect are very formal and happen in certain ways, but in another sense, there's always a little bit of luck to it. I'm going to show you another way that this iterative process worked. This you're seeing a lot of Ray's hand in this. This is these are the titles for a Billy Wilder film called Love in the Afternoon, and they were asked to do the titles. So these are all handmade fonts. I mean, this is not downloading a font. She made all these different versions, just trying to get the right vibe. And again, it's an iterative process in another sense. I mean, there's so much stuff in this. It was in this envelope, but it was a great window into the hands-on process at the office and the feeling that you always learn from whatever you were doing. There was no regrets of having had to do all these different versions. And there was an expression that Charles loved from the movie industry, which is the blood will never show. I'm sure everybody here who's working for South by Southwest is having a blood will never show experience, because it looks effortless to us, but they're trying to make it look very smooth. But there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and the same with this. All these different versions. When you see it, it's a very nice title. It's very unobtrusive, very lovely. But look at all the different ways. And somebody's, one of the guys told me that, he said, why do we have to do all these different versions? Sometimes we go back to the first one. And Charles just said, well, after we do 20 versions of the arm, the arm of the lounge chair, even if we go back to the first one, we'll know it's the right one. So that was really an attitude there. And then this modular idea of the house is something they explored in this house, which was Eames Modular House done in the 50s. And it's something we think about bringing back in different ways, and it was eventually designed for this very lovely a property nearby, a nearby canyon. But it was, again, for us at the Eames office of today, going through the exercise of building this model taught us a lot about this design. It's primarily a wood design, even though you kind of look at it and figure it'd probably be mostly steel. So there are lots of journeys that they went on that didn't necessarily they weren't able to take all the way to completion. But it was very satisfying to do this model, because when you see you just can imagine it's sort of like kind of like the Quonset hut kind of style, and then there's something when you actually take something to that step, it teaches you about it, even if what we do with it today may not be bringing it out as a product. Just the understanding is that much better. And this particular model is in a design gallery in the Philippines. The collector there has that. Plus, models are always fun. The Eameses made a model for a national aquarium that they designed, and it was so persuasive that a friend of theirs told me that when he and his wife were visiting Washington, D.C., they said, hey, we got time to kill. Let's go visit Charles and Ray's aquarium. And they drove around for like 15 minutes before they realized they'd only seen a film of the model, of the idea of what the aquarium should be. So it's, but again, a lot of times their models were really about creating that idea in the audience or in somebody to take it further. And then, this is another kind of modular house, which is the House of Cards. This is a very impressive one that was done in Grand Rapids. And then we've done, the House of Cards. So this is coming out as a toy. So all these aspects of their work keep interrelating. And picnics were always a big deal. I mentioned our mother's picnic with Charles and Ray. This is one of the whole staff up at the Eames House. And and that is one other part, because the Eames House was also a place not only where they where this staff would come and would help in certain ways, but also were a great place to try things out. This is something they did called the solar do-nothing machine. And they were one of the first people to use solar power for electricity. They didn't invent that, obviously, but a friend of theirs had made one of the first solenoids, and this is the second or third time that solar power ever moved anything. So when Alcoa asked them to design a toy out of aluminum, they thought, well, maybe they turned it down, and then they said, well, maybe we can try it with solar power. And so they decided to make something that did absolutely nothing, but did it in a very spectacular way. And I think they succeeded. But it's also, again, this other use of the house as a place to try things out. They, their main office was in Venice, California. Now it's Abbot Kinney, a shopping street. But even then, it's relatively built up. So it was a great experimental space that they had there at the house. Somebody asked Charles if the best thing you could do for a kid to teach them about art was to take them to the art museum. And he said, no, probably the best thing you could do is to do a picnic with them and make sure they helped, and give them that whole experience of creating an experience and then it being gone, and that's what you remain with is the moment and the fun of it all. So therefore, it's not surprising that their film Powers of 10, probably their best known film, centered in a picnic. And from that picnic, you can get to the edge of space. So thank you very much for letting me take you on a journey of some of the connections to the house, to all the other Eames work. And I'd love to answer any questions. Thank you for coming, though. Let's see. The Eameses were masterful at blending storytelling with design. How can modern designers apply this same principle in today's digital and AI-driven world? I think that, first of all, it's a great question. I think in general, the thing that strikes me is that they had this expression, which was innovate as a last resort, and their point was not that that innovation is bad, but you had to be careful of not losing little pieces of information that have been handed down, whether formally or informally. And I think that that's really, the thing that we all have to look at as we look at these amazing digital tools. I mean, there are things that you could only learn about that model of that modular house by building it. And Charles and Ray had built a model which we didn't have anymore. And so I think the real challenge is how do we wed this hands-on experience? Because I do think there's part of our brains that really learns in very certain analog ways, and yet the power of even to use the same example of that modular house, being able to see that digitally is very powerful. Really quickly see it as assembly. So I don't think it's an either or thing as well at all. But I think that what we have to, I guess I would just say that efficiency is overrated, and so that there are some things, and so if all these technologies just make us do things quicker, and that savings is passed on to other folks, then okay. But if one can use it to take a better journey, then that's more interesting. And I know that every designer I know is under tremendous pressure to do things faster, and so if that technology we can use to protect a space for more experimentation, that would be very interesting to figure out. Next question is, how do you balance the need for historical preservation with the desire to make the Eames House a living, evolving space rather than just a museum? I think we're content with it being a museum, and it evolves in certain ways because it must. I mean, but our mother said when we established it that this is three-dimensional source material of how Charles and Ray lived. So we do things. So one of the things we're doing is that for a while the foundation office has been in the studio. We're pulling that back so that it can be more of a gallery space, and also because the studio always changed. The house is a pretty continuous progression from the first time for that first picnic. That shot you saw of the Christmas tree in the living room. It's a pretty continuous journey. And whereas the studio had many different iterations, including towards the end of her life, when Ray needed more of a hospital bed for her back, things were moved out. So it feels very natural to have that living, evolving space happen there. But I think we always want people to feel like it's kind of a glimpse into it. But there are many challenges. I mean, the fabrics fade. I mean, it's a whole thing. And we've done a whole conservation management plans with some support of the Getty. In the family, we called it the 250-year plan. We're trying to write the book you would need in 250 years if you're in charge of the house. So we've done lots of oral histories and things like that. A favorite memory of my time as a child at the Eames House, I really loved the breakfasts we had on the patio. And we would, we'd have cut grapefruit and those little spoons that had the point on them that you could scoop out the wedge, and it wasn't extravagant, but it was visually extravagant, and it was incredible, and we would gather out there on the patio, and it was awesome, and also it was, again, this whole thing that's easy to forget is that it's a little bit of natural world. I mean, it's not. It's not the wilderness, but again, in the context of the modern city, 3 acres like that is not nothing, and so those memories are super great, and I think, and then going to the office was always a lot of fun because there's always something new that we were being shown, the new project, the new model, things like that. But mostly, the thing about Charles and Ray is that they were, as kids, they didn't talk down to us. They were genuinely curious in what we had to say, and they were. So many people have said that they met Charles and Ray, and then they didn't really get to ask the questions they wanted because Charles and Ray were asking them questions. They wanted to know what they were interested in. They wanted to know what movie. I was always into movies as a kid. They wanted to know what movies I was seeing. Ray had studied with Martha Graham, so our sister Lucia was a dancer, and so they had that connection. They were, my brother Byron was there, and he was thinking about homesteading, so they broke out the Whole Earth catalog, and I mean, it was really, they were just very present in a way a lot of adults aren't for kids, and I think that's great. Somebody's asked. If Charles and Ray were alive today, what fields outside of traditional design do you think they'd be most interested in exploring? I think that I don't really know how to answer that question. I think they would have always been very aware of different fields, and I think that when they got a field that they felt they can contribute to, they would have played with it. I mean, like with the internet, I don't know what they would have done, but the first thing they would have done would have just play. And I think that was, I mean, there's a lot of projects at the office that were just trying something out. And so I think that, they would have been, and I think they also would have, I think that I was seeing a quote recently from Carl Sagan who said something I think that they would have agreed with a lot, which is just, to be a citizen today, you need to have an understanding of science in a way that, and how things work, which even when Carl Sagan was saying it was not 100% true. And I still think we are aware of what can be done, but we don't always know how it happens, and therefore it's hard not to just view it as magic when it's actually something that's happening to us, and we need to have a tool. We need to access that toolkit. So I think that to answer that question, I think they would have wanted to, whether it was bioengineering or whatever, they would have wanted to be part of helping people be better citizens, I think. And then that might have organically led to going down in a design in a different way. They had a very broad definition of design. And Ray thought everything she did was an extension of her painting, and Charles thought everything that he did was an extension of the architecture. Not literally, but in the sense of the discipline and approach that the way it learned to the way to look at things. Can the Eames House still be visited, given the small amount of people allowed at a time? Does it make sense to make it a VR experience? We're definitely looking at all these things to how to. It can't. I mean, before the pandemic, I think we were getting about 20,000 people a year, and that was a lot. Not, by the way, not all of them at all being able to go inside. And so, so the VR, looking at these VR the opportunities, we've done some high quality captures of the interior to sort of, again, to play with it. Probably it'll have to be done again with the specific platforms or use in mind, but just to kind of get an understanding of how it works and doesn't work. And so anyway, the foundation, it'll probably be about 6 months before it can be visited again. But in eamesfoundation.org, we'll have all that information. So it will. The plan, actually, what we can't say is when the neighborhood will be accessible, because right now you can't turn off a PCH to go up Chautauqua. But again, we'll have that information. And watch this space. We have a number of interesting things that we're planning to do that are going to happen this year for the house through the foundation, and so thank you for letting me celebrate by being here with you. So, yep.
So it seems there's something in Petaluma. What's the thing in Petaluma?
So the Petaluma is something called the Eames Institute, and that's it's a museum, and they acquired part of the collection that Charles and Ray had, and they're taking great care of it. And I'm not particularly involved with it, but our sister Lisa is involved in it. And if you go to Eames Institute, they have tours of a facility there, and I know they have much bigger plans as well. So but in terms of the like taking care of the designs, that happens through the Eames Office. And then in terms of stewarding the cultural aspect, including with working with museums and collections, that's happening through as well as taking care of the house, that happens through the foundation. All right. Thank you all for being here.